Oh, you got it ready.
Just
Okay,
in
here he
case-
comes.
Just in case my throat gets caught.
You're all set, right? Here we go. Jim Condit Jr.
Okay. If there's any gentleman here who still has a watch that could bring it up so I could look at it, that would be very helpful. But I realize if you're like me, you haven't carried a watch for years because you're using the cell phone. I have the cell phone, but I have to keep punching it on. And I want to try to keep on time and get everything done here today. I told John McManus that when I grow up, I want to be able to know how long my speeches are going to be when I get to the conference, like he and E. Michael Jones and the rest of the professionals. But we did part one yesterday. We're now going to go in for part two. And this is on 9/11, pulling back the news curtain. I wanted to, before I said anything about this, though, Mike Shabbat and his table over there have all the Father Fahey books to repeat that. He's got the Talmud on Mass by Father Pranatis, he told me. And Judith has the very important research of Dr. Paul Rosnowski, who passed away in 2009, of the Nazi-Zionist connection, the final solution to Adolf Hitler. The Nazi-Zionist connection, final solution to Adolf Hitler. And there's three big events that the top ruling elite, the conspiracy, however you want to refer to it, have pulled in the last century. World War I, World War II, and 9/11. Those are the three things that were to push mankind in a direction that mankind didn't necessarily want to go. And so we're here talking about 9/11, but that DVD is about not World War II. And Judith, oh, thanks. A watch appeared from somewhere. Thank you very much, whoever did that. No, that's okay. That's okay. This is good. Okay. So the idea here is that we will we'll go into all the money from that DVD goes to the conference if anybody wants to get it. Okay, now. I hope nobody thought yesterday when I was talking about all the false flags that the criminal element in the U.S. government has done in the last century, that I was demeaning the soldiers. As far as I'm concerned, the soldiers who went to war thinking they had to fight for their country were laying down their life for their friends, the highest thing, like Christ said. So I'm not against America. I'm not against the American government. I'm against the criminal element in our government, and that's what we're talking about here. Again, the punchline is that the top wire pullers of Judeo-Masonry did 9/11, a false flag operation to blame it on the Muslims for 1, endless wars, 2, encroaching police state. This crowd, these international bankers at the Fed, the IMF, the Goldman Sachs, they were behind communism, they funded communism, they were behind Nazism, and now they're behind the Democrat and Republican Party at the top trying to bring a soft communism and then a hard communism to our country. Yesterday, anybody that's new here today might not completely pick up on everything, but one of the things we brought out is that while there was expert maneuvers that the experienced pilots said they could never do in a military jet, let a commercial jet at the Pentagon, we had the flying, what Carol Valentine, where I got this research from, this first part called the Flying Aces. The instructor said, this is from the Washington Post, the instructor said neither man was able to pass stage 1 rating to track and intercept. These are two of the so-called hijackers. After offering some harsh words, the instructor said, the two moved on. We didn't kick them out, but they just didn't live up to our standards. The Washington Post again, alleged hijackers, Nawak Asami, Flight 77, and Khalid Madhir, Flight 77, and Hani Hanjour, Flight 77, all spent time in San Diego. Two of the men, Alzami and Al-Midar, also briefly attended a local flight school, but they were dropped because of their limited English and their incompetence at the controls. Their English was horrible, and their mechanical skills were even worse, said an instructor who asked not to be named. It was like they had hardly ever driven a car. These seem like nice guys, the instructor said, but in the plane they were dumb and dumber. This article was San Diegans see area as likely target. The Washington Post, September 24th, 2001, page A7. Yet the hairpin turns, a guy named Kolstad who trained pilots for the Navy and fought fighter 240 missions or something in Vietnam and also commercial airlines, if my memory is correct, named Kolstad, he said, I could not have done in a military jet what this supposed plane, commercial plane did in Washington, D.C. Okay, next. Some things I'll just be throwing in like fun trivia. in a tragic event. Condoleezza Rice came out and said, who could have ever imagined that someone would use a plane to attack us? Tom Clancy had a bestseller in 1996 called Executive Orders, in which terrorists use a plane to go into the Capitol building, killing some congressmen and the president. And there have been all kinds of other things leading up to 9/11, and in the past where planes have been used. The Japanese, did anybody hear of World War II? Kamikazes using planes as weapons, but Condoleezza Rice couldn't imagine that anyone would ever use a plane. That's why she said everybody was not where they should, they didn't respond properly. But they closed this section, as Carol Valentine said, if the masterminds would not need competent pilots if they had the Global Hawk technology. And that was the remote control we proved yesterday exists, and proved, I think at least, in large part, one would have to accept was used on 9/11 when you look at all the facts. Now, there's a let it happen theory. The government came in, a lot of people in the government said, I had intelligence, I warned the FBI, the CIA, the MOUSE, I warned everybody, and they didn't do anything about it. They let it happen. They ignored the intelligence. A good-looking gal named Sybil Evans, who I think was an Iranian-American, came forth and was on TV a lot about this. She was a whistleblower. I believe she really had that intelligence. It was planted like all the Lee Harvey Oswald intelligence to make him the patsy in World War, in shooting John Kennedy in 1963. But I believe this was planted for the purpose of giving other explanations. And be careful of WikiLeaks, that Assange guy, and Bradley, the guy who supposedly leaked all this stuff on his own, although I don't know how you get stuff out of top-secret agencies of the volumes they did unless they let them do it. Or Snowden, who leaked all this stuff. And I think these guys may be sincere. But all of the intelligence that they leaked keeps the fairy tale alive. That those bad, clever Muslims did this, and we got to go to World War III ultimately. They're going to be telling us soon to redress it. So, and what was the result of all that incompetence? The FBI doesn't talk to the CIA. They're like a bunch of babies. We need Homeland Security. We need the KGB and the Gestapo rolled into one, even though they haven't got that yet, but that's what Homeland Security is about. I remember listening on, right after 9/11, they said to, over the media, it came over one time, and I wasn't taping, I was in my car, Washington is flying Hollywood screenwriters to D.C. to try to help them imagine what the terrorists might be thinking. Well, as soon as I heard that, I thought that's a cover because the Hollywood screenwriters wrote this stuff, these fairy tales they're feeding us. And in case anybody found it out, they're going to, oh, yeah, we wanted their help in case it leaked out somehow. Now, these are like fun facts of this very tragic event. As Michael Hoffman says, and again, I don't necessarily agree with everything that I quote their sources, but I give credit where credit is due. And Hoffman taught me the idea of the revelation of the method, where the cryptocracy of the ruling elite puts things in movies and that, because when they reveal something, then it enslaves you more if you don't know what to do about it. Your subconscious mind, for most people, becomes more demoralized, such as when I was a kid and I heard them say, 1963, the details of President Kennedy's assassination will be hidden or kept from the public for 75 years, and now they're going to extend it beyond 2028. So to the average person, you would say, why? Why? Okay, but then you think, ooh, subconsciously you feel, oh boy, there's something big here I don't understand. Super Mario Brothers, the film. Some young people pointed this out to me right as I was leaving. Super Mario Brothers in 1993 has, as part of the thing, the kids, the heroes of the movie, I guess, because it's on YouTube, look up and 1/3 of the Twin Towers disintegrate, just as we saw, and then they shot away. But you saw those Twin Towers. Michael Hoffman brought out the tarot cards, have people dropping out of a tower, and I can't remember how he tied that into a premonition of 9/11. Maybe some of you have seen the $20 bill that if you put in a certain way, you see the Twin Towers. Like people showed me that. I don't know when that happened there. Someone might say it's not relevant, but it's really weird. But The Lone Gunman on Fox News, this was a spinoff of the X-Files. If you go to YouTube and put in predictive programming 9/11, or just put in Lone Gunmen, that's a spoof of Lee Harvey Oswald. This group was called the Lone Gunmen. But they were like people that didn't have enough change for their parking meters, but they would go in and solve the problem at computers when they were asked to help the government. It has a picture of a plane going towards the Twin Towers, and at the last minute, the heroes unlock the computer, and the guy swerves up and misses the Twin Towers. It occurred 5 months, that was put on TV 5 months before the actual Twin Towers thing happened. So some of that is to me at least, interesting. Now, Carol Valentine on her website, public-action.com, talked about tooth fairies and suicide bombers. She noticed that when we had all those suicide bombers originally, and they would, over in when they started to make a big deal out of them back near the Iraq War, that as soon as the suicide bomber did the suicide bombing, supposedly the day before, the national media in America would put a pristine picture the next day, like it was Olin Mills' shot of the suicide bomber. Now, first of all, isn't the suicide bomber going to be blown up if he's wearing explosive, or she is? And Carol Valentine sent this to a lot of important people in Washington and said, how do they get those photos? And about a week later, the photos stopped and have never been shown again when they talk about suicide bombers. Same as with the 19 hijackers. It looks like they took them all to Olin Mills, which they might have, because the hijackers, I'm not saying were insincere, though. I think what happens is somebody from the CIA comes and said, look, we don't like Israel, what they're doing either to you. We're going to help you. And they fund them with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you're going to do this and this. And they think they're on an operation. But they're actually being set up to be the patsies. And they may not have thought they were doing 9/11. It may have been something else. On September 12th, this is the day after, FBI Director Robert Mueller says we have identified many of the hijackers, but they may be using false names. Then, about 6 months later, Mueller appeared at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, April 19th, 2012, and he says, we may never know who were on those planes. We don't know who were on those planes. Now we're getting the truth. And he said, we'll see. Well, remember this. Do you remember when they said that they found a car, anonymous tip? I think it was in Boston, and the FBI went and from an unnamed source, they found 2 suitcases, including a hijacker passport, hijacker driver's license, last will, copy of the Quran, flight manuals for Boeing aircraft. They were cramming for the exam as they drove to the airport on how to fly these things, and a note to other hijackers, and suicide notes. Thank God, just like Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan and James Roy, they all left suicide notes. So we don't have to have an investigation. They told us what they did and why they did it. But even with all that, in the news on April 12th, Mueller says on April 19th at the Commonwealth Club, the hijackers left no paper trail. See, they can't always keep, and Mueller may have had nothing to do with it. The FBI may have just heard on the news they found all this stuff because it's the Talmudic Jews, atheistic often, running the media, who are making these fairy tales up, okay? So Mueller may have been telling the truth there, and he may, like everyone else, just have heard it on the news. They know if whatever they announce first sticks in the public mind. Do you remember the story that Mohammed Atta, I was driving my kids to soccer. One of my daughters is here, Kate, and her husband, Joe. She was in high school, then or grade school, probably grade school. I was driving one of my kids to soccer at 5 p.m. on the Saturday after 9/11. And I couldn't believe my ears. They came on and said Attorney General John Ashcroft, has just announced that they found Mohammed Atta's passport 10 blocks from the World Trade Center. I couldn't believe it. But, they don't care if 5% of us figure this out. They don't care that how many million, the several million that the John Birch Society has. They don't care because they're just looking to fool the other 98% or 95%, and they hope they keep them full, but I think we're winning the battle on that. But anyway, so what happened here now? They told us that the planes of the World Trade Towers and the Pentagon and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, were all incinerated. There were no planes. There were no bodies. There was a few bodies they claim left at the Pentagon, but almost nothing. And the planes go into the building and cause the 2 things to collapse. But now Mohammed Atta, he has his passport, and right as the planes hit, and as there's a little fissure opening in the plane, he frisbees his passport out, and then there's a wind that nobody else saw that day, and it goes 10 blocks away. Passports are heavy; they're not like paper. Is that what happened? Now they also said they found paper. They found the paper from the Muslims and explaining what they were doing, suicide notes to their fellow hijackers in Shanksville and at the Pentagon. So there was a smart aleck. And by the way, while these papers survived, when they found the black boxes from all 4 planes, they told us these indestructible black boxes are all destroyed and we can't get any information off any of the 4. One smart aleck on the internet said, that's why they call them indestructible. Because when there's really a crisis, they're all totally destroyed. This guy also said, what the FBI should do is drop everything and just investigate what paper these Muslims were using, because the paper is indestructible. I was laughing so hard I was crying at my desk at home at about midnight when I read that 10 years ago, whatever it was, 12 years ago. So anyway, you know, George W. Bush says we must not tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories that point the finger in the wrong direction. And that's why I'm not tolerating the outrageous conspiracy theory that 4 Muslims with box cutters taking orders from a guy in a cave in Afghanistan caused our military to stand down for an hour and a half and defeated our whole $1 trillion defense system. I'm not standing, and I don't think most of you are, for that outrageous conspiracy that points the fingers in the wrong direction. Let's talk about the videos for a minute. The airport videos. They showed us that one of Muhammad Atta going through Maine. Now, Barbara Honecker, who I told you yesterday I met with out here for 4 hours, she was in the Reagan White House, worked above Reagan, talked to him every day. She was an underling, but she did research and helped write speeches and things. And she did this thing called the White Smoke Curtain that's out new. It's free on YouTube. She said, tell everybody to watch it for free, or you can get it. You can buy the DVD if you want it. And she pointed out that David Ray Griffin, who's a biggie in this 9/11 research, and I'll give you his website in a minute, he is now, and his team has tracked down, and he's a retired philosophy and theology professor, that everyone, the government, everyone finally admits, well, that main thing of Mossad Abed that we all saw, oh, there's a hijacker getting on the plane, well, there's really no timestamp on it. It doesn't really fit exactly what security tapes usually are. And as Barbara said, but it's in Maine. Where's the Boston thing? I said immediately at the time, once I read Carol Valentine's article on October 6th, I'd like to see the entire video. Every passenger that's getting on that plane. Not just Muhammad Ali, which could have been taken any time. Let's see everybody that was supposedly on that plane, and we'll say maybe it's the right thing. And then the other one they showed is they showed an airport video in D.C., in Dulles, and it turns out that when push comes to shove, airport videos at that time had 1 frame per second. So if you see the person moving, they kind of are moving like this. And this thing that they submitted, it came out in one of the trials, has 30 frames per second. So they had to admit, well, after all, this really is not an airport security video. But they put this on TV to fool people. You know, Wag the Dog, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but Robert De Niro plays the super secret assistant to the president that's so high that nobody can touch him. And William Macy plays the CIA. And what De Niro is doing with the help of Dustin Hoffman, a Hollywood producer, is putting on fake footage of a war for 10 days to distract the people from a dalliance of the president. This came out before the Monica Lewinsky thing. So they get pulled over by the CIA, and William Macy pulls him in, and Anne Heche is the real assistant to the president. So Anne Heche starts saying, I've been on medicine for 2 years. I've been seeing a psychiatrist, because she knows they're faking the war footage. And Macy says to De Niro, he says, we know there's no war on the border of Albania. We know that this is fake footage. And De Niro, which my brother Tom says is the key moment in the movie, he folds his arms, they're in a bar, and there's a TV up there behind Macy, and he says, I know it. De Niro says, I know it's true. I just saw it on TV. In another part of the movie, De Niro is walking and trying to convince Dustin Hoffman out in Hollywood to do this footage. And he's saying, you know, we sold the Gulf War to 300 million Americans by showing a smart bomb dropping down a chimney and blowing up a building. Do you all remember seeing that back in the Gulf War in 1991? He said, we sold the war on that one picture of a smart bomb going through a chimney and blowing up a building. And Hoffman says so. And he says, well, that footage was made 1/10th to scale 10 miles out of Washington, D.C., and I was there. Or he implied he was there. And Hoffman says, really? And De Niro says, how in the heck do I know? Do you get my point? So what they found out that they can do magic on TV. And Anna Catherine Emmerich, blessed Anna Catherine Emmerich, one of her visions, she said, I saw a black box in people's homes out of which the devil spoke. That isn't to say radio and TV are intrinsically evil, but she was seeing the way people are being deceived. Okay, so we don't have any security tapes. Oh, in June of 2001, before that, a lot of people could order a shoot down of a plane. In June of 2001, it was changed so that only Rumsfeld, the vice president, and the president could order it, so that nobody could order the shoot down when those planes were coming in. April Gallup was a black woman who had been on maternity leave, was back that day of the attacks, and she says when she brought her baby in, when she pushed the thing on her computer, the whole place blew up. She thought she had caused it by pushing her computer. It was just a coincidence, I'm sure. But she said when she was taken to the hospital, people showed up. She never knew who they were, except that they kind of seemed to be government. And they said, take the victim's money and keep your mouth shut. And she said she knew from one of her friends who was in the news media at the Pentagon, they were not reporters, because this person told her off on the side. Reporters were told, if you ask any questions of anybody at the Pentagon who were hurt in this thing, you will not get any more stories. A kid named Steve Riskus, 24 years old, at least to me seemed like a kid at the age of 60. He took digital pictures, a lot of them, of what really was coming in. The 9/11 Commission, not interested. FEMA investigation, not interested. And I believe they're on a website, although the one they gave me did not go there. This is all from Jim Marr's book, Inside Job. Could have been a slip-up. We do all say things we don't mean, but Secretary of State Rumsfeld said to Parade magazine shortly after 9/11 about the missile that hit the Pentagon, not the plane. And as Carol Valenside says, don't notice the obvious. The Pentagon was not protected for an hour and 25 minutes after the first building was hit in New York. No planes were scrambled, so that plane was able to hit the Pentagon to give us the excuse for World War III and the police state. And Andrews Air Force Base was only 10 minutes away. So obviously, there was, and the Pentagon is the most photographed place in the world, and it's the most protected place in the world with anti-aircraft stuff on the roofs in case there's a real attack that's not being orchestrated. Okay, so David Ray Griffin is a professor. Now, I don't know him. Barbara Honegger told me the other day she would trust him with her life, but she says the best research is at consensus911.org in any of this, because if I'm you or if I'm listening to the tape and say, who is this guy that's prattling on it like he's an auctioneer and changes course in mid-sentence, why should I believe him? So if they want to check this out, you go and you put in cell phones or whatever you want, airport security at consensus911.org, and a panel of 23 serious people have reviewed all this. They don't always agree on everything, but they give you the best evidence they could find. In Shanksville, there probably was a shoot down, and I should correct that. I believe that there may have been, if there weren't people on the other planes, they were landed and the remote control took their place. Shanksville, there probably was, because there was 8 miles of luggage strung. And when a plane crashes, you don't have 8 miles of suitcases and airplane seats, and this they did. That was in the local papers, such as the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, and Wally Miller, who was the coroner in Shanksville, came and looked in the hole they said is where the plane crashed. He said, there's nothing for me to do. There's no bodies, and there's only a few pieces of metal. There's no parts of a plane that I can see. That was in the original report in the Shanksville local paper. And then in the Pittsburgh Tribune, as they say pieces of wreckage have been found as far away as New Baltimore, about 8 miles from the crash site. When the eastbound plane crashed, a 9-knot wind was blowing from the southeast, FBI agent Crowley said. This is from Bereaved May Visit Flight 93 site, Pittsburgh Tribune, but so there was all kinds of wreckage. On September 12th, the residents and workers at business outside Shanksville, Somerset County, reported discovering clothing, books, papers, and what appear to be human remains. Some residents said they collected bags full of items to be turned over to investigators. Others reported what appeared to be a crash debris floating in Indian Lake nearly 6 miles from the crash site. Investigators locate black box. This is the article. Investigators locate black box from Flight 93, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, September 13th, 2001. Now, that is, well, we'll just leave it at that on that front. Just a second. Bin Laden has never been on the FBI's most wanted list. When an FBI was asked this by Jim Marrs, they said, we don't have any evidence to tie him to 9/11. He's never been sought for 9/11. But notice this, all 5 big TV networks immediately, within 1 day, all agreed, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, they all agreed it's Osama bin Laden. The FBI never has had him on the most wanted list. This is Osama bin Laden's original statement as carried on the BBC a few days after 9/11. He said, I was not involved, now it's on the BBC, it's not the National Enquirer, I was not involved in the September 11 attacks in the United States, nor did I have knowledge of the attacks. It is against Islamic law to harm women and children. There exists a government within the United States. That secret government must be asked as to who carried out the attacks. The American system is totally in the control of the Jews, whose first priority is Israel, not the United States. Now, again, I would modify that statement to be the top leaders of the conspiracy, many of which are Jews. 24 Here's another fun bin Laden fact. 24 bin Laden relatives were flown into Boston the day or two after the attacks and were let to go to Saudi Arabia. That was carried in the New York Times and Vanity Fair, even though the CIA snipe Snopes said it was an urban legend. Another fun fact, who was George W. Bush's first business partner in his first business? Sammy bin Laden, one of the 56 brothers and sisters of Osama bin Laden. When I said that on Mike McConnell, when I was asked on, because I put radio ads onto this about all this in 2002, I waited for what I thought was a key moment with allegedly 200,000 people listening at 11 in the morning or so. I said, most people, I said that fact, and he said, so what? McConnell's a conservative who never saw a piece of Planet Evidence or a government story he didn't like. And he said, so what? I said, I'll bet you not 1 out of 1,000 of your listeners have ever heard that, and that is great National Enquirer gossip stuff, let alone relevant that there's a network of finances that the average person doesn't see. Pakistan Prime Minister Bhutto, you can see it on BHUTTO. On YouTube, it was on 2/11/07. David Frost, who just passed away, was interviewing her, and she says in the middle of the interview she was shot in the head a month later. She had a lot of enemies, though, because she was, I think, a good person. And she said he also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden. It's on YouTube. You can still see it. Now, you would think David Frost would have said, hold on just a minute. Did you just misspeak? Or what did you just say? And he said something like, my, you have a nice color combination on today, Mrs. Bhutto. In other words, the tip-off to me is Frost and the other bigwigs in the media knew you weren't supposed to give any credence to the fact that Osama bin Laden was already dead. If we had more time, or if somebody wants to ask me, I want to explain to you the phoniness, at least the non-verifiability of the idea that they killed Osama bin Laden a while back. I was up that night and listened to the progression of news, which went from we got him, we buried his body in the ocean, to 2 hours later, because Osama law demanded, we're going to show you the film. Daggone it, the helmets, the film on all the soldiers or whatever, the military men's helmet failed. We'll show you the pictures. We're not going to show you the pictures. There's no journalists left except for us. None of the journalists, they all accept this stuff. When seeing and hearing isn't believing, Washington Post, William Arkin, February 1, 1999, they showed in that Colin Powell was there. They had taken Colin Powell's voice from speeches and pieced together Colin Powell saying, I am a hostage. I will not give up any other information. Colin Powell was laughing. He bought a copy of it. Bill Cunningham does this on WLW radio in Cincinnati all the time. They have people, the mayor, they pieced together his words to where they will play, at that time, Charlie Lucan, him saying, my mother's on crack. And they would play that all the time. It was totally false, pieced together. They all took it as a joke. So the point is, you can't trust tapes necessarily. I'm just saying some of these tapes, which they didn't play any for us as far as, few they did play. They could have been made by this article, and it's on Carol Valentine's website, public-action.com. A.K. Dudney, who did all this research on the cell phones I said yesterday, making all those calls impossible, said, Professor Emeritus, he's the Professor Emeritus at the University of Western Ontario. Anybody wants to search his articles, it's called Ghost Riders in the Sky. Some people have asked me, and it's a legitimate question, what happened to the passengers? That's like saying what happened to Jimmy Hoffa's body. Unless somebody confesses, if you're not in on the crime, you don't know for sure. But you could have had either the technology where, if the planes were fitted, remote control planes, by planes that hijack, they thought if hijackers kept hijacking planes, they fitted a lot of planes so that the air traffic controllers could land them, and they just took the control out of the plane. And so that could have happened, and maybe the people just died crashing into the buildings, unable to help themselves. Or they could have had the air traffic controllers tell them, you got to land because we're under attack, and then taking the people on buses and killed them there. You know what? In the 9/11 Commission, not one air traffic controller was called. If you were doing an investigation, wouldn't the first thing you would do is say, let's get those air traffic controllers in here and see what the pilot said when the plane started to be hijacked? I don't think anyone here has ever heard the name of an air traffic controller. They were never asked. But the New York Times did carry an article, and I got the date, I'll get to it here shortly, that the air traffic controllers, all their notes and the tapes they made on the afternoon on 9/11 were destroyed. That was in the New York Times. Not that the reason I say that is that's the enemy admitting this. If one of us put it in magazines or newsletters, they'd say, well, they probably make it up. When the enemy admits it, it's better evidence when it's this type of thing. Destruction of the evidence. All of the steel and everything else was taken out of New York City when the towers fell. Destruction of the crime scene, a crime. The controlled demolition that was hired to take it out of the New York City also took it away immediately from the Oklahoma City bombing. And the steel was cut in such a way so that all the steel that they found at the World Trade Towers fit in the trucks that they wanted to haul them off to send them to China, which was very convenient that the buildings fell exactly that way. In Fire and Engineering, a fire magazine that has been around for 125 years, editor Bill Manning said that, one, this is a crime, destruction of the crime scene, and it should be analyzed for why these buildings fell. And he also said that every investigation, FEMA and the 9/11 Commission, were half-baked farces. That was May 6, 2004. The New York Times carried that article. They had destroyed all the tapes and notes of the controllers that were on that day. Now, I'm sorry, I'm guessing now, but I believe all those air traffic controllers, as so many other people in 9/11, were Mossad agents who look at themselves at a war against mankind and a war against the world to make the world safe for Israel and their network, and they're the ones that would do this type of thing and would keep quiet and would know what they were doing and be trained and have the mental disposition to believe they were doing right, make war by way of deception, the motto of the Mossad. Who controlled the building? We'll get back to this soon. If I have to jump ahead, I will, but I think I might be on track. Judith, how much time do you show us having, or is Judith?
You have 20, 25 minutes.
Okay, good. At 25, thank you. I'm going to take that one, though. And I'll try to finish in 20. We'll see. Okay. Larry Silverstein, friend of Benjamin Netanyahu and Rupert Murdoch, bought the building 6 months earlier. He was in control of the building. And it's in Christopher Boland's book, Solving 9/11, but every person who was in the chain of transferring the building to Larry Silverstein was a longtime Israeli operative Mossad agent, and Christopher Bolin, at nauseating length, documents who these people are and their long history in the Mossad or in the government of Israel, because he's trying to show that we're just not, shooting from the hip on who. But so that Larry Silverstein had control of the building. So what happened right before 9/11? Ben Fountain, who was a financial analyst from the 47th floor in the South Tower. A lot of this is from Jim Marr's book, Inside Job, but it's also in other places, told People magazine in the weeks preceding 9/11, numerous unusual and unannounced drills in both towers in Building 7 were evacuated for security reasons before the week of 9/11. So there's all kinds of security drills, all kinds of evacuations. Scott Forbes, a senior database administrator for Fiduciary Trust, which was up on one of the top floors, said there was a power down the weekend prior to the 9/11. And he said this was a big inconvenience. He had to transfer all the files from his building and the World Trade Towers to another building. And he took off on that Tuesday because he had been working so hard on the Monday and the Friday around the power down, which was Saturday and Sunday. He said, if I wasn't working so hard, I would have died. He just stayed home because he was exhausted and he saw the towers collapse. But he says that those power downs meant there were no security cameras, no locks that could be checked if they were locked or unlocked. And then the New York Times and others carried that Silverstein removed the bomb-sniffing dogs 5 days prior to 9/11. Which you always want to do if you want to make sure your security is good. Remove all the security. Wayne Black, an expert on such matters, has noted, when you have a security contract, you know the inner workings of everything. Is there any, and Carol Valentine asks, is there any denying that something very peculiar was happening when standard security operations were altered only days before 9/11, even going so far as New York Newsday reported to remove bomb-sniffing dogs on September 6, 2001. Who could authorize this? Not Osama bin Laden, not the hijackers, not those crafty guys that to hijack the planes against. No, it was Larry Silverstein and, quite frankly, the Mossad agents, mainly, though, of American dual citizen, so-called Israeli Jews who were citizens of Israel here, who were running our government, quite frankly, in large part, which we'll get to that in a minute. And all through the thing, you'll hear different people. If you watch 9/11 Mysteries or other people, you'll hear witnesses saying, they told us to go back to our desks while the buildings are being hit. Oh, no, things are safe. Go back to your desk. They were hoping for 10,000 killed that day. They only got 2,800. That was the initial thing the news media said, we're going to have 10,000 dead. 2,800 died because people did not believe them. But somebody that I know knew a German gal, Phil is his name. He was a student once at the school where I, for a few years, taught as a fill-in at one of the little schools, Latin schools. And he called his friend who was on one of the top floors, who was a gal from Germany and was here as a German national working. He said, "Get out of there," whatever her name is, "get out of there." And she said, "No, I got clients here and they're telling me it's safe." She died a few minutes later when the things collapsed. And a lot of people didn't believe him. They went out. Okay. The collapse of the towers, Van Romero, who was the Energetic Materials and Research Testing, told the Albuquerque Journal on September 11th, the planes didn't bring these things down. This was a controlled demolition. He had something to do with the building, but he knew something about the building. I remember hearing that report. I thought, boy, that's big. This guy who's kind of an expert, he's saying that it was a controlled demolition. 10 days later, he retracted to the Albuquerque Journal. He said, "Oh, no. I think it was fire after all." But there's a guy who didn't retract, Kevin Ryan. He was on Coast to Coast, the AM, the other week. He's got a new book coming out, The Other 19. Not the 19 hijackers, but who he thinks is really guilty of 9/11, Cheney, Chertoff, and so on and so forth. He names and what he thinks they did. He was at Underwriters Laboratory, and he went and looked and saw that Underwriters Laboratory had tested the actual steel in the Twin Towers, which was 47 columns in the middle. It's too big to put your arms around each one of the columns, and all kinds of steel on the outside of the building. And it said these buildings could last for 3 or 4 hours if there was, without even being affected, without weakening, if there was 2,000 degrees of heat. Now, plain kerosene only gets up to 1,500 degrees, if I got my number. But if it had 4 hours, it would not be affected. And he said to his bosses, "Well, why isn't anybody giving this to the news media?" And so he then wrote some letters after months to all the key people, and they came to him at the Underwriters Laboratory and said, "Kevin, you're fired because you're threatening to hurt our business." In other words, the government wasn't going to give them as much business if they didn't shut this Kevin Ryan up. But he was courageous. He went out. He's on his own. He's speaking. He didn't back down. And what more can you say than that? This actual steel was tested, but these buildings fell in 20 minutes. Carol Valentine, public-action.com, has on our website that appeared much earlier than Ryan came out, "Muslims Suspend Law of Physics." And I don't know if she wrote it or somebody else wrote it. It's under J. McMichaels. And he says, "Gee, those darn Muslims not only defeated our entire defense system, they suspended the law of physics to make this steel melt when it wasn't hot enough to melt it." In 9/11 Mysteries, the video, which is free on YouTube now, the Meridian building in Philadelphia burned for 5 hours. Steel building wasn't affected at all. In Spain, there was a building, Madrid, Spain, that burned for a few days. It was a steel frame building. It not only didn't collapse, but at the end of it, it still had a major heavy crane on top of the building. That's what really happens when fire hits a steel building. Audio tape of the firefighters, it was released through the New York Times and others eventually, had Fireman Battalion Chief Oreo J. Palmer and Fire Chief Ronald B. Puka. They both perished a few minutes later in the South Tower. But the tape says, "Hey, we got 2 small fires up here on 478. I think we can knock it down with 2 lines." They weren't worried. A fellow that uses a stage name, Patrick Riot, I know his real name, and he's going to come out with a book, and I hope he uses his real name. Patrick Riot, Pat Riot, Patriot. That's why I use that name. Very excellent voice, and I've heard him on radio shows on the internet. He was from a family of Irish cops. He delivered furniture to the World Trade Towers for 20 years leading up to 9/11. He said everything he delivered had to be fireproof. So this idea that the whole tower, just every curtains or anything just caught on fire, false. Paper did, and the jet fuel that came in did. Everything would you want to be in a 110-story building if everything wasn't fireproof? Anybody could fall asleep on a couch with a cigarette and start threatening everybody's life? When you hear these things, it immediately, I think, is obvious that, hey, we've been played here. But somebody did get the word in advance that the buildings were going to collapse, and I don't think this guy was in on it, on this part of it. He was in on the cover-up. Mayor Giuliani told ABC's Peter Jennings the next day that, the next day he told him that we were at the temporary command center at 75 Barclay Street, and we were told that that building would collapse, and it did before we got out of the building. And Sophia in the 9/11 Mysteries keeps doing a close-up and close-up, and it has Giuliani saying, "We were warned the buildings were going to collapse. We were warned the buildings were going to collapse." She does it in a very dramatic way. Who warned them? How did they know? Steel frame buildings had never collapsed in history. I'm going to skip over some things because I want to make sure I get the things at the end here. And this is John Sharp was making the point. John Sharp the Younger was making the point last night that the buildings fell in 8 to 10 seconds, the same speed as if you had a billiard ball and dropped it from the top of the buildings. As Eric Hufscheid, who made another one of these videos, Painful Questions, he made the point that each floor was a whole acre. Each floor had steel bolts, really good, obviously, and steel weldings. If that building fell at the free fall, 8 seconds, 10 seconds, that's the speed as if there was a ball dropping with no resistance. That means all those bolts, all those weldings had to break at the exact same second, so there was no resistance whatsoever for the building to fall in 10 minutes. Right there, you know it had to be explosions. It could not have been just the planes causing the buildings to collapse. It had to be explosions that were knocking all those things out at one time. Another website, I'm mentioning this in passing like it's a footnote, but 1,700 engineers and architects have joined AE911truth.org, led by Richard Gage, and there's 1,700 who say this is physically impossible. This is against the laws of physics. And there's 12, according to them, there's 12 architects and engineers that have been willing to back the official story, but we heard about them on the media all the time. Then we go to the popular mechanics farce, where the establishment money bought Popular Mechanics, and Michael Chertoff's cousin, Ben Chertoff, took it over and put a bunch of absurd lies in Popular Mechanics that's been refuted by Richard Gage and by David Ray Griffin. But that's what the media always quotes. And I brought this up to Mike McConnell, our morning talk show in Cincinnati at that time, and beat his brains out over a few things. I didn't bring that up. I beat his brains out over some of these other facts like the free fall. They went to break for 5 minutes. He came back and said, but that Condit, who believes that remote control planes went into the Pentagon, because then they thought that discredited me. I don't think so much anymore they think that. But Popular Mechanics, he said, then he started reading Popular Mechanics. Obviously, the ADL, his people monitor, one of the groups of the Jewish lobby, monitor every show, faxed him the Popular Mechanics because he didn't have it on the tip of his tongue, and he starts reading this bogus information. And he said, I said, yeah, but next day I called him and said, Mike, that's Michael Chertoff's cousin who put all that stuff in there and was running the magazine. He said, yeah, but they say they've never talked. And I said, right, Mike, right, okay. So anyway, Robert Schuller of Crystal Cathedral, this is one of those things they can't censor, came and it got in a bunch of the media that he said, I went to the World Trade Towers, and it all seemed like it was powder dust. It didn't seem like it was chunks of concrete. It looked all like powdered sugar. Dr. Judy Wood has recently come up with a book called Where Do the Towers Go? She believes new Nikola Tesla-style weapons were used here to pulverize the building. I think she's probably right, because how do you turn the whole building into basically powder sugar and get the whole steel columns to disappear? Sophia carries the 9/11 mysteries. One of the South Tower, I think, starts to tilt and then disintegrates before our eyes because the buildings were one-third, one-third, one-third. Again, it looks like all... And did you ever see the picture where there's big white gushing smoke almost as tall as the building? She makes the point, what is that in our experience? This is an excellent point. That isn't a controlled demolition because we've seen those and there's a little dust when they hit the ground. That's a volcano. That's what a volcano looks like when it's exploding. So there was tremendous explosives you could infer from that in the buildings. One of these steel beams that was incredible amount of tons was hurled into a building across the street. In 2005, I believe, they found human remains on the roof of the Deutsche Bank building several blocks away. Boom. Things were pulverized and blown up. That's what you would have to infer from what we know now. Then there were the explosions at the base. 10 minutes, Judith? No, how many minutes left? 10 minutes, okay. Explosions at the base, and I'm going to skip over these. On 9/11, she has CBS mystery. She has CBS footage of Carol Marin, who quit a Chicago station when they took up Jerry Springer, and she got a job with Dan Rather. She's on that morning filled with dust saying, CBS reporter, there were many explosions at the building, and this is how I got filled with dust. Then there's the firemen. You can read it in Inside Jobs. I'm going to have to skip over it. One after another, and layman witness after witness that says there were explosions at the base of the building shortly after the fire hits, including CNN, including CBS News, including local Fox 5. And William Rodriguez, who was the janitor, who had keys to every floor in the building, he became famous speaking all over the country. He was sponsored by an eccentric millionaire named Jimmy Walker, and Walker has to be eccentric for me to call him eccentric, but he was an eccentric millionaire, and also Willis Carto of the American Free Press also funded him to go in many places all around the world. And he said there were explosions everywhere. It came up, people, a black cook, for instance, and they showed a picture of him, came up and his skin was hanging off, and he said there's been an explosion in the basement. The molten steel, according to the firefighters, underneath the towers burned for 3 or 4 weeks, or was it months? 3 or 4 weeks at least, burning under the floors of the building when they collapsed. That was from the jet fuel? No. That was from what Dr. Stephen Jones of Brigham Young University calls thermite. Thermite was found in and around the building, some of the samples that were taken, because people got samples. And Dr. Stephen Jones, I think, lost his job over that. But he makes the point that there was thermite, and he makes a long argument that you can read at Gage's, David Ray Griffin's website about that. No one in government was reprimanded, scolded, certainly not fired. Budgets were increased. The culpable were promoted. Somebody made the point that the Twin Towers being brought down by airplanes is like throwing a beer can at a garbage truck. Now we're going to get into what I hope is my finale here, and that is the responsible of what I call the Jewish Crime and Treason Syndicate, which is part of the conspiracy for 9/11. Immediately, General Hamid Gul of Pakistan said, this is who did it. Israel and the Jewish agents of the American government. Colonel Don Grand Prix, who passed away, said that this is who did it. The PNAC, we talked about product for the new American century, which in 1997 said we need a new Pearl Harbor. They did the blueprint. You have books by one of their number, Huntington's Clash of Civilization, Zbigniew Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard, all talk about this scenario of a 21st American century and how to do it. We need that new Pearl Harbor, they all say. Here's the members of PNAC, at least some of the prominent ones, but there's hundreds. But here's a representative of the top, and I'm gonna. Each one of these is a member of the Jewish or Lobby or Jewish Crime Syndicate. Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Kenneth Eidelman, Louis Scooter Libby, Douglas Feith, Dov Zakim, who was the controller at the Pentagon, David Wormser, Elliot Abrams, Elliot Cohen, Daniel Pipe, Stephen Breyer. Control of the Pentagon was in the hands of this group, and we'll get into that in a second. Dov Zakim, comptroller, $2.3 trillion disappear, and he's with remote control technology. He's on a company with remote control technology for planes. The Defense Policy Board, as who many say controls the Pentagon, and not surprisingly, there's a lot of what they're calling Zionist and longtime Bilderberger members, such as Henry Kissinger, James Schlesinger, Elliot Cohen, Paul Wolfowitz, Douglas Feith again, Richard Pearl, Kenneth Edelman, and then non-Jewish members they mentioned are James Woolsey and Newt Gingrich. But so that is, they have control there at the Pentagon. And as I say, the Israeli lobby had not only the motive, but to get us going on this World War III and this police state, but they also had the means and the opportunity. We covered yesterday that the Israelis controlled airport security and passenger screening. They controlled, one Israeli company, there are others that aren't Israeli, have the ability to paint planes to make them look like something else. Control the Twin Towers. Silverstein, who got it 6 months before. Netanyahu is his good friend, so is Rupert Murdoch. Now, Rupert, well, we'll mention that in a minute. Anyway, when Netanyahu was asked, he probably did dozens of interviews that day, but one of the interviews he slipped up and said, 9/11, this terrorist attack was a very good thing. Then he edited himself, said, well, it's not good, but it will generate immediate sympathy for Israel. So he probably just slipped up in one of 100 interviews, but naturally the people that don't like him picked up on that, but it's interesting. And then there's the other thing that's weird is that the FBI and other investigators that didn't make it to the report found that Israeli art students and moving company students who turned out to be Mossad agents were always planted near all these terrorists in Florida and in California. They always had apartments in the same building or nearby. What are the odds of that? Control of the media. I have an entire thing on that I guess I'm not going to get to because I want to make sure that I finish here. But I'll just say it briefly from this one article that was in Jeff Rent's. Gerald Levin, Michael Eisner, Edgar Bronfman, Summer Redstone, Dennis Damerman, Peter Chernin. This is 2003. The names may have changed. Controlled every major network and so many other major media in the United States. I guess that just leaves Rupert Murdoch at Fox, who's the only non-Jew. Oh, wait a minute. Christopher Boleyn went to Australia and found that Rupert II is Jewish. His mother was named Joy Green, although he tells the world he's a newfangled Catholic. A guy who got his start with pornography in the middle of Britain's magazines and who loves abortion, looks like a Zionist. But so Rupert Murdoch, even he, turns out to be Jewish on his mother's side. We're going to have to skip over that. I got a bunch of other good stuff on the media, but we got to skip over that. Control of Congress through AIPAC. Paul Finley, the former congressman, said that. Pat Buchanan called Congress Israeli-occupied territory in 1994. James Traficant does the same thing recently when he got out of jail. Control of the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, Chertoff. Did you know there were 5 dancing Israelis filmed? Okay, I'm going to stop on that, but I have to be able to finish one thing here, Judith. So anyway, if you look at every choke point, the Israeli lobby is there. Now I'm going to conclude with this. Toby Keith and Queen Isabella. And the Blessed Mother. Toby Keith wrote a song called The Red, White, and Blue, and he said a sucker punch came in somewhere in the back. And he thinks it's the Muslims. The sucker punch was from the ruling elite, and especially the Jewish lobby, the criminal part of it. And what we need today is to start calling for the arrest of all these people for treason and sedition. Start with the media owners. Treason, sedition, and corruption of minors. The arrest of Chertoff. The arrest of anybody who was in the line of all these things. And that is what we need to do. And that's why, and now this will really be politically incorrect, Queen Isabella, she reluctantly started the Inquisition in 1492, 25 years before Protestantism, because her state said, look, there's Jews pretending to be Catholics, and they're turning us over to the Muslims, and they're going to invade and destroy Europe. That's what the Inquisition was about. What we need in America today is a new Inquisition on which one of these double citizen Jews and their allies are Americans, or are they serving the international Jewish network. Finally, I believe, as you know, I want to try to end here on a positive note, and I am ending, Judith. St. Louis de Montfort said that this time when the world is straightened out, which may be, possibly, maybe not, but possibly chastisement, 3 days of darkness, peace of Fatima, in the end my immaculate heart will triumph, is going to happen somehow. And St. Louis de Montfort said, this time Jesus wants his mother to get the credit, and that's what's going to happen. This time his mother is going to get the credit. It hasn't happened yet, and I think it's going to happen. And in really closing here, in those days, we will not have Michael Chertoff and Obama and Joe Biden deciding everything. And even though we're all imperfect, we'll have men like John Sharp and David Brindle and Hugh Owen and many of the other people in this room deciding what's happening when we come to those days of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. We're not going to have Pelosi or Hillary Clinton. We're going to have people like Fran Griffin, who isn't here, and Judith Sharp. I have to put the Sharps in twice because they put on this thing. I thank you. I thank you. I thank the Sharp family for inviting me this event again, and I thank all of you for coming here to witness, keeping the idea of Christendom alive, and putting up for whatever babbling just happened in the last 50 minutes. Thank you very much.